Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into tonight's tale of the origin of life in Ooo, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical, seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up, and let's begin. Before the laughter of candy people, before the songs of heroes, and the hum of magic, there was only quiet. A silence so deep it seemed endless, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Ooo had not yet become Ooo. It was something half-born, half-remembered, like a dream trying to recall what it once was. In that stillness, the land was strange. The scars of the old world remained like shadows etched into the soil. The sky, though blue by day, carried a faint shimmer at night, a reminder of the blast that had once torn the heavens apart. The Mushroom War had ended long ago, leaving behind the fragile bones of human civilization, buried beneath glassy sands and overgrown ruins. But time, ever patient, had begun to weave something new upon that broken canvas. No one was there to see it, but if you could have stood upon the hills of the empty world, then you might have felt it, a hum, deep beneath your feet. Not a sound, but a vibration, soft and slow, as if the planet itself was beginning to remember the rhythm of life. The oceans stirred first. Their waters, once poisoned and still, began to shimmer with faint motes of light. Some said these were remnants of human experiments, fragments of strange technology still pulsing with forgotten power. Others believed they were sparks of magic, awakening after a long and dreamless sleep. Whatever the truth, life began to move again. Tiny organisms, new yet ancient, floated through the depths. Their shapes were odd and luminous, not quite animal, not quite plant. Some carried traces of old human DNA twisted by time. Others pulsed with the faint glow of elemental energy. It was not evolution as we know it, but something stranger, something born of memory and magic intertwined. The land, too, began to stir. From the blackened soil rose strange flora, plants with candy-colored petals and metallic stems, roots that hummed softly when the wind passed. The air shimmered faintly with residual magic, bending light in gentle ripples. The sun still rose and set, but even it seemed gentler now, as if afraid to wake the slumbering world too soon. There were no kingdoms, no cities, no names, just the quiet murmur of a newborn land healing itself. The old machines of humankind lay rusting beneath layers of crystal dust. Some still blinked faintly, like stars lost beneath the earth. Others had melted into the terrain, becoming part of the new ecology, a fusion of the natural and the artificial. It's said that even the mountains carried memories. Their ridges formed patterns too deliberate to be chance, almost like sleeping giants lying beneath blankets of moss. Some believe those mountains were once the ruins of great towers now softened by time and nature. Others whisper that the mountains themselves are ancient beings, resting until the world needs them again. As the centuries drifted by, the atmosphere of Ooo thickened with energy. The magic that had long been dormant began to rise like mist from the soil, unseen yet everywhere. It seeped into stones, rivers, and even into the air itself. With each passing moment, the world grew more awake, more alive. The first spirits began to take shape, faint glimmers of consciousness without bodies, whispering in the wind and flickering through the twilight. Perhaps they were echoes of humanity's lost souls, lingering between life and death. Perhaps they were the Earth's own dreams, forming thoughts for the very first time. No one can say for certain, but those whispers laid the foundation for everything that came after, the beginnings of magic, and the birth of awareness in a world that had forgotten how to feel. And somewhere deep within the planet's crust, beneath layers of melted stone, and fossilized memory, something began to move, a slow pulse, a living rhythm. Some say it was the mother gum, ancient and immense, awakening in the depths. Others think it was the elemental forces, fire, ice, slime, and candy, beginning their first conversation in the language of creation. Whatever it was, the silence of Ooh was ending. The stillness that had lasted for eons began to crack like ice under spring's first thaw. The world's dreams were turning into forms, liquid, shifting, and curious. The oceans bubbled with unseen activity. The skies carried soft streaks of glowing vapor. Magic was returning, but it did not return as it had before the fall of humanity. It came back gentler, slower, more organic, almost shy. If you imagine the earth itself as a being asleep, then this was the first moment it began to stir. The turning in its rest, the slow, sleepy sigh of something that had forgotten its name. And just like a dream that slowly forms into shapes and colors, Ooh began to imagine itself anew. The forests that would one day be filled with singing creatures were still only seedlings, hidden in the damp shadows of shattered valleys. Rivers ran quietly through the bones of fallen skyscrapers, washing away the stories written in rust and ash. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something sweet, perhaps the earliest trace of the magic that would one day become candy life. And high above, the stars looked down on the quiet rebirth. They had seen this world end before. They had watched as it was burned, buried, and forgotten. But this was different. This time, life was not being created by human hands, nor by accident alone. Something deeper was at play, a force that remembered both science and spirit, trying once again to reconcile the two. The hum deepened over time, spreading through the soil like the heartbeat of something vast and unseen. Each tremor carried a spark, and each spark became a possibility. Where water met the dust of the old world, shapes began to emerge fluid, shifting, curious about themselves. They were not yet creatures, not quite alive in the way we understand, but they carried a kind of intention, a gentle leaning toward becoming. In quiet pools hidden beneath fallen cities, strands of magic and remnants of radiation intertwined like threads in a tapestry. Together, they created tiny miracles, the first pockets of new existence. Bubbles of strange, gelatinous matter blinked in and out of being, glowing softly beneath the surface. They moved with uncertain grace, as if guided by the memory of what life once was. From these simple beginnings, Ooze's vast diversity would one day bloom. But for now, it was enough just to exist, to drift in the calm waters of rebirth. Above ground, the remnants of human creation stood like silent monuments to a vanished age. Skyscrapers leaned and crumbled, their glass fused into crystal by the fires of the past. Vines crept through empty windows, roots wrapping around broken machines. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, the hollow buildings made a low, echoing sound almost like voices. Some say that was the earth singing to itself, or perhaps the lingering spirits of humankind whispering softly to whatever came next. It's peaceful to imagine it that way, isn't it? That even in the quiet ruin of what was lost, there was music, a kind of soft promise that life would return. As magic thickened in the atmosphere, the land began to shift. Old boundaries dissolved. The familiar laws of physics grew looser, more flexible, as though the world itself were stretching after a long, heavy sleep. Rivers no longer followed their old paths. They curved and rose in strange, beautiful patterns. Clouds gathered into shapes that looked almost alive, watching the ground below with curiosity. It was as though creation itself had grown playful, testing the possibilities of what life could become. Somewhere amid this transformation, the first proto-beings began to form tiny motes of living magic, drifting like dust in sunlight. They were fragments of energy with faint awareness, flickering between the physical and the spiritual. When they touched water or soil, strange reactions followed. Moss that glowed faintly in the moonlight, pebbles that pulsed with warmth, trees that grew faces in their bark. These early miracles were not random. They were signs that the world was learning, experimenting with creation, trying again and again until it found balance. If you stood there, perhaps on a ridge overlooking the glowing valleys, you would see the faint beginnings of Ooze's future. Not the kingdoms or the laughter yet, but the foundations, gentle ripples, spreading outward from unseen hands. Life was learning how to take shape, guided not by evolution's slow climb, but by intention and magic mingled with memory. And deep in the ocean's heart, something vast and pink began to stir. The mother gum, ancient, sacred, and unknowable, was awakening. It moved like liquid thought, thick and luminous, filling underwater caverns with a faint glow. Some legends say it was the last echo of human science, a living chemical compound left to mutate over millennia. Others whisper that it was life itself, the cosmic being planting a seed deep within the earth to begin again. Whatever it was, its awakening marked a shift in everything. The ocean floor trembled, not with violence, but with the quiet motion of birth. Streams of glowing matter flowed upward, seeking the surface. When they reached the sunlight, they split and scattered, forming new pools, new oozes, new beginnings. The first sentient organisms would one day trace their lineage back to this moment, the gentle bloom of consciousness rising from the sea. Even the air began to hum with change. The wind carried a faint sweetness, the smell of something living. Clouds of pollen, or perhaps particles of pure magic, drifted across the empty plains. When they settled, grass began to grow, shimmering faintly with color that shifted with the light. It wasn't like the grass we know. It whispered when touched, and sometimes rearranged itself overnight. Ooh was inventing its own rules of nature. And through it all, time moved softly. Days were long and golden, nights cool and blue. The stars above seemed closer than before, brighter, as if curious to watch what was unfolding below. Their light mingled with the glow of the earth, creating a dreamlike twilight that never felt fully dark. The silence that had once stretched unbroken across the world was now filled with faint murmurs, the rustle of growing things, the sigh of the wind over glassy ruins, the bubbling of unseen life beneath the surface. The world was no longer sleeping. It was half awake, dreaming in motion. There were no eyes yet to see it, but the planet itself was watching. The same ancient consciousness that would one day give rise to heroes, kingdoms, and songs was now only a feeling, a quiet awareness humming beneath every stone. Ooh was becoming aware of itself, and in that awareness, something sacred was born, not a creature, not a god, but the idea of life itself, fragile and beautiful, carried on the breath of a world still remembering what it means to be alive. The pulse of creation continued to ripple outward, patient and endless, shaping the land with gentle persistence. In the quiet plains where once cities had stood, strange crystalline growths began to rise from the soil. They caught the moonlight like frozen water and hummed faintly when touched by the wind. Some glowed with inner light, pulsing in rhythm with the unseen heartbeat that echoed through Ooze depths. These crystals, some say, were remnants of the world before, the fusion of human technology and nuclear energy transformed by the returning magic. Others believed they were natural seeds of the elementals, the first anchors of ice and fire and slime and candy forming in still forgotten places. Whatever their origin, they stood as silent witnesses to the world's rebirth, quiet monuments to the dream of life returning. As the centuries turned, the air grew warmer, richer with energy. Rain fell more often, carrying a faint shimmer like stardust melting into water. With each storm, the world seemed to remember something new. A new kind of flower blooming from nowhere, a patch of ground breathing with unseen warmth, a creature forming from the mixture of soil and song. There was no plan, no single direction, just the slow, harmonious improvisation of a planet finding itself again. From the seas, tendrils of pink ooze began to emerge, crawling slowly across the coasts and deltas. They glistened under the moon, moving without purpose yet full of intention. Wherever they touched, the ground changed color, muted browns giving way to soft hues of coral and gold. Life followed in their wake. Clusters of moss, spores that drifted into the wind, tiny luminous organisms that floated like lanterns over the waves. The mother gum's reach was spreading. And from her depths, something resembling thought began to form. It wasn't language or reason yet, but an instinct, a yearning toward connection. The ooze would reach toward light, toward motion, toward warmth. It sought otherness, difference, as though searching for pieces of itself scattered across the world. In that yearning was the first echo of what would one day become sentience. If you imagine the world at that moment, it was both haunting and serene. The ruins of the old age still jutted from the earth like bones, but now vines wrapped around them in soft spirals, glowing with faint phosphorescence. The ocean sang softly against the shore, not in waves but in whispers, patterns of sound that seemed to follow the heartbeat beneath the ground. The air shimmered like a mirage, thick with unseen currents of power. In this strange equilibrium, time began to lose its usual shape. Seasons blurred together, marked not by weather, but by the mood of the land. Some ages were calm and golden, when the air smelled of sugar and the wind carried laughter that had no source. Others were quiet and cold, when frost crept down from the north, shaping new patterns into the mountains. The world wasn't yet divided. It moved as one living being, breathing in cycles of creation and rest. And in that deep, tranquil rhythm, the first spirits began to take clearer form. They emerged from the mist and the soil, shaped by imagination and need. Some lingered near the oceans, soft and translucent, drifting like reflections made solid. Others coiled in the forests, taking the shapes of animals that no longer existed, echoes of the human age reinterpreted by the dreams of the planet. These spirits did not speak, but they felt. They carried the moods of the world, the sorrow of the old, the hope of the new. They were, in a way, the emotions of Ooo itself given shape and silence. And when they moved through the land, life responded. Grass bent toward them, water shimmered in greeting, and the air filled with faint lights. They were not gods, not yet, but they were something close. The first custodians of the waking world. Beneath the northern glaciers, the spirit of ice stirred, its awareness still fragmented but growing. In the volcanic caverns far below, the essence of fire began to breathe again, stretching through molten rivers like veins of living flame. Deep in the humid swamp, slime bubbled with contentment, curious and ever-shifting. And in quiet, untouched corners, sweetness began to form, the faint crystalline presence that would one day give rise to candy. These were the first elemental seeds, though they did not yet know their names. They were not rulers or forces of balance yet. They were simply expressions, moods of nature given life. Their energies mingled constantly, overlapping and merging, creating strange hybrids, frozen flowers that bloomed in flame, rivers of syrup running beneath glacial peaks. The world was experimenting with itself. And in that playful experimentation, consciousness began to take hold in unexpected places. Pebbles grew faces when touched by moonlight. Patches of moss hummed softly when rain fell. The boundaries between the living and the unliving grew blurry. It was a world without clear definitions. Everything was in flux, everything possible. Some legends claim that during this time, Ooh dreamed of itself in 1,000 shapes, every one a test, a whisper of potential. A stone dreaming of walking, a flame dreaming of feeling, a drop of slime dreaming of laughter. These dreams accumulated, gathering momentum until life could no longer remain only in the realm of the imagined. Then one quiet dawn, something new emerged from the depths of the mother gum, a form that trembled, uncertain but aware, not just instinct, but recognition. It lifted a small, soft limb toward the light filtering through the surface and paused, as though understanding for the first time that the world around it was real. It was still only a fragment, a piece of thought wrapped in matter, but that gesture, the reaching, was the first act of consciousness in Ooh, the moment when the dream of life became aware that it was dreaming. And from that single silent motion, the great unfolding began. From that first trembling gesture, the world seemed to lean closer, listening. The wind softened, the sea calmed, and the hum beneath the soil steadied into a rhythm that felt almost like a lullaby. The being, small, shapeless but alive, stood at the threshold between the unknowable past and the endless future. Around it, the pink glow of the mother gum pulsed gently as though proud of its creation. It wasn't human, not even animal, but it noticed the light, and in that noticing, Ooh itself grew a little more awake. More and more shapes began to form, slowly, gracefully, like thoughts taking root. Some drifted back into the sea, dissolving into memory. Others remained, learning to move, to grow, to change color when touched by sunlight. They were fragile, fleeting things, yet every one of them carried a spark of the same yearning, the wish to exist, to continue, to see what might come next. It was life in its most innocent form, full of curiosity and without fear. The world responded tenderly. Rain fell in delicate mists that tasted faintly of sugar. The soil warmed under unseen hands. The sky, still soft from the dawns of early time, seemed to blush with pale pinks and golds as the new creatures turned their faces upward. There were no predators yet, no conflict or hunger, only the quiet rhythm of becoming. But even in this peaceful beginning, the seeds of transformation were already being planted. Magic so abundant and free began to weave deeper into matter, binding itself to the flesh and memory of living things. The elemental energies that once drifted apart now found their resting places, ice in the peaks, fire in the heart of the world, slime beneath the swamps, and sweetness blooming in the fertile plains. Each element hummed a different melody, and together they formed the symphony that would one day become Ooze balance. Still, balance was fragile. Where fire reached too high, the land blistered and cracked. Where ice grew heavy, rivers froze and fractured. And yet, each disruption created something new. Molten glass that captured starlight. Frozen lakes that reflected the heavens so clearly they seemed to open portals to another sky. The world's mistakes became its art. Somewhere within that intricate balance, the first forest began to grow. Their trees were strange and dreamlike, branches bending like arms, leaves whispering in tones that carried faint echoes of thought. They reached into the ground as much as they reached toward the sky, drawing in ancient memories buried deep below. The spirits that wandered there began to gather near them, drawn by their warmth. The forests became sanctuaries of memory, the first places in Ooh that could truly be called alive. As the mother gum continued her slow expansion, her children spread across the land, evolving with every step. Some became creatures of soft candy flesh, gentle and glowing. Others hardened into stone-skinned beings, silent observers of the ever-changing earth. Every form was an experiment, a reflection of the world's imagination. And though many of these early lives vanished as quickly as they appeared, each left behind a trace, a particle of knowledge, a vibration, a story that would ripple through time. In this way, the first generation of Ooze life laid the groundwork for all that followed. The laws of magic settled softly into place. The rules of transformation began to take shape, though they were more suggestions than laws. Matter could still dream of being something else, and often did. Mountains became beasts, rivers turned to song, and even the stars sometimes descended to walk the land in disguise. If you could stand there and watch, you'd see a world that breathed like a living organism. Mists rolled gently across the hills, shimmering with colors that shifted like the surface of water. Great vines uncoiled from cliff sides and reached into the sky, curious and alive. The air itself carried the faint scent of creation, sweet, metallic, and new. It was a time when every breath was possibility. And deep within the heart of the mother gum, beneath layers of warmth and time, something brighter began to flicker. A memory, perhaps, not from the world, but from the cosmos beyond. Some believe this was when the being known simply as life first looked upon Ooh. Not the tiny forms crawling from the ocean, but the world itself, the tapestry of elements, magic and memory, and decided that it was good. The divine spark didn't appear as lightning or flame. It was quieter than that, a soft ripple of awareness moving through every living thing, uniting them in a single moment of recognition. The moss, the ooze, the crystals, the mist, all felt it, a heartbeat shared between creation and creator. And from that heartbeat, a truth emerged. Ooh was not merely reborn, it was remembered. Life wasn't starting over, it was continuing a story that had been told countless times before in countless worlds, each dreaming the next into being. The mushroom war, the humans, the magic, all were threads in a pattern far older than any kingdom or god. As the world settled into its rhythm, the first true sunrise of the new age broke across the horizon. Its light spilled over the plains and forests, glinting off crystal and wave. The air shimmered gold. The last traces of the old world darkness melted away into warmth. The silence that had once defined Ooh was gone now, replaced by the gentle chorus of a planet awake and alive. Somewhere in that dawn, the first creatures lifted their faces toward the light, not yet knowing why. Perhaps instinct, perhaps joy, or perhaps, in some quiet, ancient corner of their being, they remembered just faintly what it meant to be alive before. And so Ooh opened its eyes. The long sleep was over. The silent dawn had passed, and the dream of life had begun anew. When the first dawns had passed and the mists of the silent era began to fade, the world of Ooh no longer felt like a newborn dream. It had rhythm now, a pulse that beat through the soil, the rivers, and the clouds. The mother gum still whispered beneath the oceans, but above the surface something more ancient was beginning to take shape. The four great temperaments of existence were stirring: ice, fire, slime, and candy. They were not yet the mighty elementals that would later shape kingdoms and lives. In these early days, they were more like moods of the world, vast and wordless, drifting through the landscape like emotions without faces. Where the air grew still and sharp, the breath of ice settled. Where warmth gathered, fire's laughter shimmered like sunlight through flame. In the swamps, slime murmured softly, restless and curious, and in quiet meadows, sweetness began to crystallize into the first traces of candy's gentle touch. These were not spirits born of chaos, but of balance. Each existed because the others did. Ice kept fire from consuming too much. Fire kept ice from freezing the world into silence. Slime softened the extremes, binding things together, while candy, The tenderest of them all gave everything a sense of harmony, a sweetness that made life bearable even when the world was harsh. The people of later ages would come to call them elements, but in truth they were feelings, the emotional structure of Ooo itself. When ice sighed, the mountains froze and slept. When fire dreamed, volcanoes bloomed. When slime danced, the rivers twisted into new paths, and when candy hummed, flowers sprouted from ash. In the beginning, these forces did not have names or forms. They were simply energy, existing in balance. Yet balance never stays still for long. It shifts, breathes, and sometimes tilts. And as it did, the elements began to take on shapes that mirrored the world's own curiosity. It is said that the first form ice ever took was not the shape of a person, but a tear, a drop of perfect clarity that fell from the sky and froze before it touched the earth. Where it landed, frost spread outward in a delicate spiral, crystallizing everything in its reach. The tear was not sorrow, it was awareness, the world learning what it meant to preserve, to remember. That moment became the soul of ice, the power to hold things still so that they would never be lost again. Fire's first spark came differently. Deep within the planet, near the molten heart where the scars of the old world still glowed, a flicker of movement stirred. It was born not from destruction, but from yearning, the wish to move, to create warmth, to illuminate the darkness that ice had left behind. The first flame danced without direction, crackling gently, not in anger, but in joy. It reached upward, searching for air, for freedom. That longing became the spirit of fire, the will to live passionately, even knowing it could burn. Slime's awakening was subtler still. It came from the damp hollows of the world where the earth met the ocean and neither wanted to let go. There, the first slime pulsed like a heartbeat. It didn't want to destroy or preserve. It wanted to connect. It flowed into everything it touched, blending one life into another, never content to stay apart. From that instinct grew the essence of slime, the joy of unity, of togetherness, of constant motion and change. And finally there was candy. Its birth was unlike any of the others. It began quietly in places where sunlight pooled gently on the soil, where magic mingled with the faintest traces of sweetness left behind by the mother gum. Crystals began to grow there, small and delicate, each one carrying the taste of warmth and comfort. The wind blew through them. They chimed softly, like laughter. From that sound, the spirit of candy awoke. Not fierce, not hungry, but kind. Candy was the balance of all the others, the desire to nurture, to soothe, to bring joy where sorrow had taken root. For a time, the world lived within these four rhythms. Fire's warmth spread across the plains, while ice carved quiet sanctuaries in the north. Slime shaped the lowlands into living pools, and candy filled the air with a sweetness that drew creatures to rest. None ruled the others because none yet knew they could. They simply were, each learning how to exist, how to blend, how to give the world flavor and texture. The early life born under their influence reflected that unity. Some creatures glowed faintly with heat, carrying the joy of fire in their veins. Others were cool and glassy, their thoughts slow but serene, molded by ice's patience. Many were flexible and bright, shifting colors like water under slime's guidance, while others grew soft and fragrant, like living confections, beings of candy's tenderness. Each carried a little of all four, yet one always sang a bit louder than the rest. That imbalance gave life its variety, its individuality. If you were to walk across Ooo in those early days, you would not see boundaries between elements. You would walk from a valley of sugar dust into a forest of crystal frost, then wade through glowing rivers where warmth and slime mingled like liquid light. The land was a painting in motion, and every breeze carried a scent or temperature that told a story. The world had found its palette. Life had its colors, and Ooh, still half awake, began to dream in the language of the elements. Caverns, weaving itself into the soil and binding the world together like unseen roots. Candy settled wherever the land was calm and sunlit, growing soft and sweet like fruit after the storm. Yet even in their quiet divisions, they remained intertwined. When fire melted ice, the water fed slime. When slime nourished the soil, candy bloomed. And when candy cooled and hardened, ice found strength in its stillness. The four forces were not meant to destroy each other. They were meant to teach each other balance through their endless dance. There are ancient songs lost to time that speak of the first beings born directly from these elemental currents. They were not gods or mortals, but seeds of consciousness, drifting across the landscape like dandelion spores. Some say they were tiny lights, each carrying a spark of an element within them. Others believe they were shapes without form, thoughts that moved through the air and slowly learned to take on bodies of their own. From these seeds grew the first spirits of Ooh, creatures that embodied their element's essence. They were pure and wordless, but not mindless. A being of fire might wander across the plains, leaving glowing footprints in its wake, never burning but warming whatever it touched. An ice spirit might sleep for 100 years, then awaken to whisper frost across the hills. Slime spirits were always moving, splitting and merging, reflecting the light of the sky in their translucent bodies. And candy spirits, gentle, almost invisible, would hum lullabies to growing things, encouraging life to take root. These early spirits were the bridge between energy and life, the first test of what the world could create when it dreamed deeply enough. Over countless ages, they learned to take on shapes more complex and lasting. Fire learned how to flicker into humanoid form, its emotions shaping its color and heat. Ice learned stillness so perfect it could mimic the shape of a person frozen in thought. Slime, curious and ever-changing, learned to imitate the things it saw. And candy, perhaps the most patient, learned how to grow in communities, turning sweetness into society. The world began to hum with these new forms. It was no longer just a landscape. It was a living memory of the four forces that had birthed it. Mountains, rivers, and valleys carried their echoes, and wherever life formed, one of the elements was always near. Even the simplest creature carried traces of them in its being. Warmth in its pulse, coolness in its stillness, fluidity in its motion, and tenderness in its nature. The mother gum, still sleeping in the deepest oceans, felt their growth like a distant heartbeat. The same ooze that had birthed the first life now listened, as the surface above it came alive in color and movement. The world was becoming something new, not just an echo of creation, but a storyteller in its own right. And though the four forces did not yet have names or rulers, their influence began to spread through the myths that drifted between creatures. Some whispered of a flame that could think. Others spoke of frost that could dream. The seeds had become spirits, and the spirits had begun to imagine. In that moment, Ooh took another quiet breath, and somewhere, in the balance between ice and fire, slime and candy, the first hint of will was born. Life no longer moved only because of the world's dreaming. It began to move for itself. The awakening of will changed everything. No longer were the beings of Ooh content to simply drift with the rhythm of the world. They began to feel something deeper, a longing to understand themselves, to shape the world rather than merely reflect it. This longing stirred within the elemental spirits like a gentle ache, one that carried both beauty and danger. For the first time, fire wanted to create flame, not just be at it. It began to play, to experiment with sparks, to see what would happen if it brought light into places that had never known warmth. Some of these fires flickered out harmlessly, like whispers in the night, but others caught upon trees and stones, changing the landscape forever. Where once there had been quiet meadows, there now stood blackened soil, but from that soil new life sprouted. Fire had discovered transformation. Ice, watching from its frozen sanctuaries, learned something different. It discovered that in stillness there was wisdom. By freezing a moment, ice could study it, preserve it, keep it safe from the constant motion of slime and the chaos of fire. Ice's creations were beautiful and fragile, crystals that captured the world as it was, holding light and memory within their frozen lattices. Through ice, the world learned the value of memory, of pausing long enough to understand. Slime, ever fluid and curious, responded to both. It flowed into the cracks between fire's burnt earth and ice's frozen plains, blending the two together. Slime had no need for permanence or control. It celebrated impermanence, the idea that nothing had to stay the same. Wherever it moved, new patterns emerged. Slime taught the world about adaptation, about how everything could connect and reshape endlessly. Candy, meanwhile, grew quietly. It took what it had learned from the others and turned it inward. It watched fire's transformation, ice's preservation, and slime's fluidity, and saw in them something that could nurture instead of destroy. Where others created or remembered, Candy gave comfort. It shaped little pockets of life into warmth and sweetness, creatures that thrived by cooperation, by community. Candy's lesson was care, the art of giving back to the world instead of taking from it. Together, these forces laid the foundation for every living thing that would follow. The roots of every tree, the flicker of every flame, the pulse of every heart, all carried the echoes of the four elemental seeds. Ooze itself had become an orchestra, and the elements were its instruments. Yet even harmony in time seeks to express itself in greater complexity. The spirits began to evolve again, not just in shape, but in mind. Fire spirits gathered into small tribes, drawn together by their shared energy and passion. They learned to dance with their flames, creating bursts of light that looked like laughter. Ice spirits built sanctuaries, places of reflection and meditation where time itself seemed slow. Slime spirits explored the caverns, discovering that when they merged, their consciousness could expand, many minds becoming one. And candy spirits began to form gardens, nurturing soft, living things that grew from sweetness itself. It was during this age that the first true elementals are said to have been born, beings not merely touched by their element, but embodying it entirely. They were the purest forms of their respective forces, each one a bridge between spirit and godhood. The Flame Mother, the Ice Shepherd, the Slime Matron, and the Candy Weaver, names passed down in half-remembered songs and ancient carvings. Legends say they were not created in an instant, but grown, shaped over millennia by the dreams and emotions of their lesser kin. When enough fire spirits longed for expression, the Flame Mother was born in a burst of radiant heat that painted the skies red. When ice spirits longed for solitude and wisdom, the Ice Shepherd emerged, cloaked in stillness so deep it silenced storms. Slime's matron rose from 1,000 connected pools, a consciousness so vast it felt like the pulse of the world itself. And Candy's Weaver appeared last, formed from the laughter, the kindness, the small gestures of comfort that had slowly accumulated across the land. Each of these beings carried within them the purest essence of their domain, and through them, the elements began to find identity. They learned to speak to the world, to direct its flow. The balance they maintained was not perfect, but it was stable. Ice cooled the heat of fire. Fire awakened the calm of ice. Slime nourished both, and candy softened the edges of all. Together, they guided the land into new eras of creation. But as the elementals grew, so too did their awareness. They began to see themselves as guardians and, in time, as creators. They wondered whether they could bring new kinds of life into being, not just reflections of their element, but hybrids, creatures who carried pieces of all four within them. It was this experiment, this quiet act of divine curiosity, that would eventually lead to the first mortals of Ooh. They would be fragile and imperfect, unlike the timeless spirits before them. But they would have something even greater, a spark of individuality, of unpredictability, something that even the elements themselves did not fully understand. For the first time since the world's birth, creation would no longer belong only to the cosmos. It would belong to life itself. The birth of mortal life was not a sudden miracle, but a gradual unfolding, like dawn light spilling slowly over a sleeping valley. The elementals did not intend to create sentient beings as we know them. Rather, they wanted to give their essence form beyond themselves, to see what their union might yield. What began as an experiment of balance soon became a quiet act of love. The Flame Mother released embers into the air, each carrying warmth and movement. The Ice Shepherd exhaled mist across the land, cooling those sparks so they wouldn't burn away. Slime's matron sent ripples of her own essence through the soil and water, binding those embers and mists into something solid. And Candy's weaver, patient and gentle, wrapped it all together with sweetness, the subtle harmony that allowed life to feel joy. What emerged were the first true living creatures of Ooh. Not spirits, not gods, but beings of heartbeat and breath. They were small, shapeless things at first, creatures that glimmered faintly in the twilight, their forms constantly shifting as the four forces struggled for balance within them. Some glowed faintly like molten glass, others shimmered like jelly, and some crystallized into delicate, sugary shells. These early beings were fragile, yet astonishingly resilient. They could move, feed, and even dream in ways the elementals never could. The world around them began to change to meet their needs. The heat of fire softened, creating gentler climates. Ice retreated to the far north, content to watch and protect from afar. Slime flowed into the underground, sustaining life through moisture and renewal. Candy spread across the fields, turning sunlight and soil into nourishment. The balance between them became not just a cosmic equilibrium, but a living ecosystem. And from that point forward, Ooh was no longer merely alive. It was self-aware. Each new life form added a verse to its growing song. Some adapted to fire's warmth, their bodies glowing with inner light. Others found comfort in ice's calm, learning endurance and patience. The creatures of Slime's domain became shapeshifters and swimmers, ever-changing, while those of Candy's fields grew sociable, forming small groups and sharing their sustenance freely. Life diversified, multiplied, and with every generation, the influence of the elements wove deeper into its being. The elementals watched with quiet wonder. Though they had shaped this world, they realized that life no longer belonged solely to them. It had taken on its own rhythm, unpredictable, messy, and filled with feeling. For the first time, Ooh began to experience something neither divine nor elemental, but entirely mortal, emotion. The little creatures feared, loved, fought, and protected. They formed attachments to the land, to each other, to the very forces that had created them. The Flame Mother saw her warmth reflected in their courage. The Ice Shepherd saw his calm mirrored in their moments of peace. The Slime Matron rejoiced in their unity and adaptability, while the Candy Weaver found in their kindness a continuation of her own purpose. Yet with emotion came imbalance. Some beings grew too close to one element, too fiery, too cold, too pliant, or too indulgent. Conflict began to ripple through creation, though in those days it was more like the first sighs of a storm rather than the storm itself. Still, it was enough for the elementals to realize that harmony could never be permanent. It was something that had to be continually tended, like a flame kept alive through the night. And so they reached a quiet agreement. Each would retreat to their own domain, watching over the balance from afar. The Flame Mother sank into the volcanic heart of the world, her embers lighting the molten veins that would one day feed mountains. The Ice Shepherd withdrew to the farthest reaches of the north, his breath weaving endless glaciers across the land. Slime's matron spread herself beneath the surface, threading her consciousness through the roots of all things. And Candy's Weaver dissolved into the meadows, her presence lingering in every flower, every sweetness born from sunlight. Their separation marked the end of the Second Age, the Age of Formation, when life had learned to live for itself. Though the elementals still existed, their touch grew distant, manifesting only through their children and the energies that sustained them. The creatures of Ooo continued to evolve, forgetting their origins as all children do. They built small homes, learned to speak in sounds, and discovered that the world responded when they reached out to it. What the elementals had not foreseen, however, was that their essence would persist, not just in the landscape, but in the hearts of every being that followed. The spark of fire's passion, the calm of ice's reflection, the adaptability of Slime, and the kindness of Candy all became part of the mortal soul. And so, long after the elementals vanished into myth, their presence lingered in every act of creation and every moment of care. The laughter of a child carried Candy's gentleness. The endurance of an explorer held Ice's patience. The courage of a warrior burned with fire's resolve. And the way people grew and changed with each other, that was Slime's eternal rhythm, flowing on. As Ooo entered its next era, life had firmly taken root. The planet no longer dreamed, it was awake. But deep within its core, beneath oceans and crystal layers, the elemental seeds still pulsed in unison, keeping the heartbeat of creation steady. They were the unseen guardians of all that lived, their influence silent yet eternal. And though the world above would someday forget their names, the truth remained. Every spark, every drop, every breath in Ooo still whispered the same message from the dawn of time. That life in all its forms is the child of balance. When the world of Ooo settled into its rhythm, after the elementals had withdrawn to their sacred domains and the first mortal creatures had taken their tentative steps upon the earth, there remained something ancient and restless, still stirring beneath it all. It was older than the elements, older even than the idea of balance itself. It pulsed deep in the blackness beneath the oceans and mountains, where sunlight had never reached. The ancients called it the primordial ooze, though in truth, it was neither liquid nor solid. It was something in between, a living memory of the world before creation took form. Some say it was the residue left behind from the mother gum, her eternal essence that could never truly fade. Others whisper that it was something even older, something born from the thought of existence itself, long before Ooo had a name. In the beginning, the ooze was content to sleep. It listened to the world above, to the sounds of rain and fire, to the heartbeat of creatures walking upon the land. But over countless eons, as life continued to bloom and decay on the surface, fragments of it began to fall back down, ashes, bones, and forgotten dreams. The ooze absorbed them all, and in doing so it began to remember. It remembered what had been before the elements. It remembered the chaos of the early cosmos, when energy and matter were still trying to find purpose. It remembered the moment when the first light had touched the world and the silence that followed it. It remembered every living thing that had ever died and dissolved back into its embrace. The Ooze had become a library of all that had existed, a dark mirror to the bright, growing world above. But with memory came curiosity, and with curiosity came movement. The Ooze began to stretch itself upward slowly, quietly, feeling for the world it once helped create. When it touched the roots of the land, strange things began to happen. The soil shifted. The air grew heavy. The living and the dead began to mingle in ways they never had before. This was the beginning of mutation. Where the elementals had created life from purity, the Ooze created it from remnants. It took what was broken, forgotten, or discarded, and reshaped it into something new. Bones became coral, ashes became moss. Dreams hardened into strange crystals that pulsed with a faint, uncertain glow. These were not the elegant creations of the Flame Mother or the Ice Shepherd. They were imperfect, unpredictable, and filled with contradictions. But they were alive. In these mutations, Ooh found something entirely new, instinct. The creatures born from the Ooze did not act from balance or elemental harmony. They acted from hunger, fear, and the simple desire to continue. Their forms were often strange, many-limbed, translucent, or twisted, but they were tenacious. Where the elemental creatures lived in peaceful cycles, these new beings struggled, fought, adapted, and evolved. They changed with every generation, learning to survive in ways that no elemental influence could have predicted. It was as if the Ooze was teaching the world to dream a different kind of dream, one where creation was not serene, but wild and self-determining. In time, these mutations spread across Ooh, blending with the life that already existed. A creature born of fire might absorb the resilience of the Ooze and learn to endure cold. A candy spirit might become more complex, its sweetness laced with the bitter taste of survival. And so began the Age of Mutation, an era when the world stopped being shaped solely by divine intention and began shaping itself. There are old legends buried in the ruins of Ooh that speak of the first intelligent beings born during this time. They were said to be the children of both worlds, part elemental, part Ooze. Some bore the mark of fire in their eyes, yet their skin shimmered like glass. Others spoke in tongues that no creature remembered teaching them. They built small dwellings along riverbanks, carved strange symbols into stone, and began to wonder why they existed at all. The Ooze did not speak to them in words. It spoke through dreams. Those who slept near the deep cracks of the earth claimed to see visions, images of the past, of the world's birth, of the elementals weaving their first acts of creation. Some saw themselves reflected in the black surface of the underground pools, only to find their reflections staring back with a will of their own. The Ooze, in its quiet way, was reminding them that everything that lived was built upon something forgotten. To the surface dwellers, this substance was both sacred and feared. Some regarded it as the world's memory, a divine force that could teach the truth of existence. Others saw it as a curse, a thing that corrupted and twisted what was once pure. Neither view was entirely wrong. The Ooze carried both creation and decay within it. The reminder that life and death were never separate, only different stages of the same cycle. As Ooze skies changed and ages turned, the Ooze continued to rise and fall with the tides of the world. It seeped into the cracks between the elements, invisible but ever-present, influencing evolution in subtle ways. Even the elementals, powerful as they were, could not erase its presence. They, too, had been born from the remnants of the mother gum, and in the deepest part of their essence, they could feel the pulse of the Ooze calling them home. In this way, the forgotten Ooze became the hidden architect of Ooze's future, a silent sculptor working beneath the visible layers of creation, shaping the destiny of the land without ever showing its face. As the ages turned quietly onward, the forgotten Ooze continued its secret work beneath the crust of Ooo. It was patient, immeasurably so, shaping and reshaping life in silence, never needing recognition, never rushing. To the beings above, life seemed to simply evolve as though nature itself was the artist. But in truth, it was the Ooze, ever remembering, ever blending, that guided the brush. It reached into the deepest roots of forests, coiling around the veins of trees and whispering old memories into their sap. It drifted through oceans, mingling with plankton and kelp, filling them with faint, glimmering awareness. Even the winds carried traces of it, microscopic fragments rising from the earth, invisible but present in every breath. The Ooze had become the quiet foundation of life's persistence. But its influence was not always gentle. Where the elemental harmony was too strong, where fire burned too brightly or ice froze too deeply, the Ooze reacted like a dream disturbed. It sent ripples through the land, changing the rules of life to keep balance. In places of heat, strange plants grew with glowing roots that drank fire instead of water. In the frozen wastes, beasts of transparent flesh emerged, their hearts glowing faintly with warmth to defy the cold. These were the first true mutants of Ooo. Some scholars, long after, would say that these beings were the origin of magic itself, that magic was nothing more than mutation perfected. For the Ooze did not create by logic or design. It created through intuition, the way a river carves its path or a dream invents impossible places. Each mutation was a question asked by the world. What if life could be this instead? And sometimes those questions reached the living. Travelers who stumbled too close to Ooze pools would find their bodies subtly changed, hair that shimmered, skin that glowed faintly, eyes that could see in darkness. Others found their minds touched, filled with strange insights and voices that didn't belong to them. These were not curses in the traditional sense. They were gifts, though often misunderstood. The Ooze had always been a keeper of memory, and those who touched it were forced to remember not just their own lives, but the history of the world itself. Those few who survived such transformations often became mystics, wandering storytellers who spoke in riddles about what they had seen. They told of a time before light and matter, when everything was one endless ocean of thought. They described the birth of the elements not as divine acts, but as the Ooze learning to dream in color. They spoke of the world's loneliness, and how every creature born thereafter was an attempt by that loneliness to understand itself. To many, these were dangerous ideas. The followers of the elemental cults, those who worshipped fire, ice, slime, or candy as divine progenitors, saw the Ooze as blasphemy, a corruption of pure creation. They called it the dark memory, claiming that it sought to reclaim what should remain separate. Yet in hidden circles, others revered it as the first mind, the origin of consciousness itself. Archaeologists of later ages, those who dug into the ruins of pre-mushroom war civilizations, would uncover strange artifacts buried deep in the rock, fossilized strands of black residue that still pulsed faintly when touched. They found symbols etched into stone that resembled spirals and flowing shapes, often surrounding what looked like a drop of ink suspended in air. These remnants hinted that ancient beings had not only known of the Ooze, but had studied it, perhaps even tried to harness it. There are theories that the Ooze's influence reached its peak during the rise of early magic. Some claim that the first wizards drew their power not from the elements, but from the memory of the Ooze. tapping into the primal patterns written into reality itself. To channel the ooze was to reach backward, to pull fragments of the world's first thoughts into the present. But such magic came at a cost. Too much exposure meant losing one's form, one's identity, becoming part of the ooze again, returning to the dreaming mass beneath Ooze's skin. It is said that in the deepest catacombs, far beneath even the ruins of the Candy Kingdom and the icy halls of the north, the ooze still flows, breathing in time with the planet's core. It waits, not as a monster, but as memory itself. The more the surface world changes, the more the ooze remembers. Every war, every love, every extinction. It absorbs it all, storing it in silence. And in the quietest places of Ooo, when the wind stops and the ground hums faintly beneath your feet, you can almost hear it thinking. They say that sometimes, when the moonlight touches the wrong patch of ground, the ooze awakens, not violently, but with curiosity. It ripples faintly, remembering faces that no longer exist, replaying moments lost to history. It does not mourn or judge, it simply recalls. For the ooze, memory is not emotion, it is continuity. Every story that ever ended above its surface still lingers within it, recorded in an eternal, formless archive. In the earliest centuries after the Great Cataclysm, when the world was still reshaping itself from the scars of the Mushroom War, traces of the ooze began rising again. Pockets of glowing, viscous black liquid appeared in caves, craters, and forgotten tunnels. Creatures who stumbled into these places would emerge altered, some stronger, others frail, but brimming with strange insight. It was as though the ooze was trying to rebuild what had been broken, using whatever fragments it could find. There are old tales, long before Princess Bubblegum's time, of a wandering scientist known only as the Binder. The Binder was said to have been obsessed with recreating life from death. His journals spoke of black ichor that dreams, and of memory given flesh. He believed that the ooze was not a curse, but a kind of cosmic inheritance, a leftover tool from creation itself. In the ruins where he once worked, explorers later found stone vats and skeletal machines, their insides stained with a sheen that still shimmered faintly under torchlight. Some whisper that the Binder never died, that he simply merged with the substance he worshipped, becoming a thought within the endless mind beneath the earth. The ooze's influence did not stop at living creatures. Entire ecosystems were reshaped by its slow touch. Some forests grew backwards, their roots exposed to the sky. Their leaves burrowed deep into the ground, glowing faintly like buried lanterns. In certain lakes, time seemed to move differently. Fish grew ancient in a single night, their scales etched with fractal markings that looked almost like writing. The ooze was rewriting the rules of nature, experimenting with forms that defied the logic of even the most powerful wizards. And then there were the dreamers, people, often children or poets, who would fall asleep near places where the ooze pooled, only to awaken changed. They would speak of visions filled with oceans of black light, of voices whispering in countless languages, of floating shapes that felt like thoughts given form. They claimed that the ooze was trying to remember them, to record their dreams as part of its own growing consciousness. Some dreamers would vanish entirely, leaving behind only faint imprints in the earth, as though they had melted into memory itself. The more you look at the history of Ooo, the more the ooze's fingerprints appear. It was there beneath the foundations of the first castles, under the roots of the ancient tree forts, even within the dark waters of the nightosphere. Every realm, every dimension, seemed to have echoes of it. It was less a substance and more a pattern, a quiet, repeating idea that life could never truly end, only change its shape. But as with all forgotten forces, there came a time when Ooo tried to bury it. Wizards began sealing away ooze pools with charms and runes, terrified of its ability to twist reality. The elemental powers, sensing arrival, spread their domains to suppress it. Fire burned the surface, ice locked it beneath glaciers. Candy covered the land with sweetness and distraction. The ooze retreated deeper underground, watching, remembering, waiting for the next moment of stillness. Yet even in hiding, it continued its subtle work. It whispered to the fungi and moss that grew in dark corners. It sang to the roots that wound around ancient ruins. In forgotten laboratories, it seeped into glass vials and gears, sleeping until someone curious enough would open the seal. Some say the ooze had a purpose, that it wasn't chaos at all, but guidance, that it was teaching the world to evolve, to never stay still. Mutation, after all, is not destruction. It is adaptation. And perhaps that's what the ooze wanted most, for life to remember how to change, how to survive even after gods and empires fell. Others see it differently. They say the ooze is what remains when creation itself grows tired, that it's the leftover thought of the universe, the residue of everything that ever lived and died, pooling together because it has nowhere else to go, a graveyard that dreams endlessly. Whatever truth lies beneath, the ooze remains one of Oo's oldest and most elusive mysteries. Even Princess Bubblegum, with all her knowledge of bioalchemy, has never fully understood it. Her own creation, some whisper, might have been guided by it. That deep beneath her lab, in the heart of her candy experiments, the ooze stirred once more, smiling in its sleep. Because that's the secret the world keeps forgetting. The ooze never really vanished. It only waits for life to need it again. Ate yachitai. And in the quiet moments when Oo's surface world hums with laughter and song, the ooze still dreams beneath it all. It dreams of stars collapsing into seeds, of oceans remembering every drop they've ever lost, of people who once walked and loved and fell asleep forever. It dreams because that's what it was born to do, to remember, to reshape, and to begin again. If you could sink down into those depths, past the layers of soil, through the forgotten bunkers and the fossils of 1,000 civilizations, you might eventually find yourself drifting in a space where everything glows faintly blue-green. There would be no sound except a soft pulse like a heartbeat echoing through the water. And in that pulse, if you listened closely enough, you might hear voices. Not words exactly, but fragments of feelings, old joy, regret, curiosity. The ooze keeps them all. Every living thing leaves a trace, and the ooze holds onto it like a lullaby. Many of Oo's greatest mysteries may trace their roots back to this quiet, ancient consciousness. The nightosphere's dark energy, the lich's corruption, even the creation of the first candy beings, all might share echoes of that same primordial essence. Not because the ooze causes evil or good, but because it represents something beyond those opposites, the pure persistence of life. It doesn't care what form life takes. It only ensures that something always continues. Imagine for a moment that the ooze is not a substance, but a dream that the world itself is having. When the dream grows too strange, it spills over into the waking world. That's why so many of its creations feel half real, because they are caught between states of being. Golems that move like memories, forests that whisper in forgotten tongues, ghostly shapes beneath the ice that are not quite dead, not quite alive. They are all expressions of that dream trying to remember itself. There are stories whispered among ancient spirits that the ooze might be older than even the elementals, that before fire, ice, candy, and slime, there was only the dark fluid sea, an endless reflective surface that mirrored the first light of creation. When the spark of existence touched it, it rippled and gave birth to the first forms. Not beings exactly, but ideas given texture. From those ideas came the elementals, and from the elementals, the world. If that's true, then the ooze is not a remnant of destruction. It is the mother of beginnings. That theory explains why it appears whenever great change occurs. After the Mushroom War, it rose again. When the magic man lost his sanity, traces of it appeared in his dimension. When Princess Bubblegum molded her first candy life, faint traces of ooze were found clinging to the early test tubes. Perhaps every act of creation awakens it briefly, like stirring an ancient memory. And yet, it remains humble. It does not roar or demand worship. It only waits beneath everything, like the silence between two breaths. Its purpose seems neither divine nor malicious. It is simply patient, waiting for the next spark, the next collapse, the next dream to drift through the cracks of the earth and join it. There are some who believe that the ooze has begun to think again, that deep beneath the ice kingdom, where melting glaciers meet the ancient earth, it has started forming shapes, slow-moving reflections that resemble people, walking through translucent tunnels of memory. They say that one day those shapes might rise again, not as monsters, but as echoes, beings of pure recollection, carrying within them every story the world has ever told. If that day comes, it won't be the end of Ooo. It will be a continuation of its oldest rhythm, the pulse that says life does not end, it transforms. The ooze will not erase what came before. It will simply weave it back into the cycle, like night turning into dawn. And perhaps that's what life truly is in Ooo. Not a straight line, but a series of dreams rising and falling, merging and parting, all flowing back toward that same dark source beneath the world. A soft, endless sea of memory waiting to be born again. As we leave this part of the story behind, remember this. Somewhere beneath your feet, the world remembers you too. The soil, the roots, the quiet streams, they all listen. Every word, every laugh, every kindness finds its way down to the sleeping ooze where it is kept safe, like a secret lullaby sung by the earth itself. Because in Ooo, nothing is truly forgotten. Every beginning sinks back into that silent, shimmering ocean, and from it someday new life will rise, different, strange, but familiar, carrying the soft hum of all that once was. We drift into a quieter realm of thought, the place where science, magic, and faith all blur together under the same pale moonlight. We've explored the soil of Ooo, the ancient ooze, and the slow rebirth of life through elemental forces. But now let's turn our gaze upward to something even older and softer, the unseen breath that moves through everything. This part of our tale is called Spirits and Sparks, the Divine Touch. There are moments in the history of Ooo where things happen that cannot be explained by mutation, by science, or even by magic. A spark appears where no flame should be. A voice hums softly in the silence before creation. Some call it divine intervention. Others call it coincidence. But whatever it is, it seems to carry intention, a whisper of something greater than even the elementals. Long before the kingdoms rose, before the candy people learned to smile, and the ice kingdom froze into its pale crown, there were quiet presences that drifted across the empty world. They were not gods in the way mortals imagine them, but rather feelings given form. Warmth, curiosity, longing, fear, each took shape in the world like gentle flames. Some scholars call them proto-spirits, fragments of consciousness that gathered around sources of energy or memory. In time, they became the unseen caretakers of Oo's growth, guiding the slow dance of creation without ever needing names. It's said that these spirits first touched the Ooze, They were drawn to its dreams, curious about the stories it remembered. The Ooze, ancient and patient, responded by forming shapes for them, bodies woven from mud, mist, and light. These were the first beings who moved of their own will, not animals, not yet people, but something in between, living echoes of divine thought. They would rise, wander, and dissolve again when their purpose was complete. Some believe the elementals themselves might have been shaped this way, born from the mingling of spirit and matter. The fire elemental could have been the first divine spark, the embodiment of passion and motion, a being born from the spirit of change. The ice elemental followed, born from reflection and stillness, carrying within her the cool clarity of understanding. The slime and candy elementals were gentler creations, representing adaptation and joy, the softer sides of existence. Together, these beings became the visible expressions of what had once been formless. But what about the spirits themselves? Did they vanish once their work was done? Or do they still linger, weaving through Ooze winds and waters? If you listen closely on a quiet night, some say you can still hear them humming. Tiny melodic ripples that travel across lakes or through the air just before dawn. They do not speak in words, but their presence can be felt in the smallest acts of life. When a flower blooms out of season, when a storm forms from a clear sky, or when a dying creature suddenly finds peace, these are their gentle fingerprints. Throughout Ooze myths, divine sparks appear again and again. The cosmic owl, who visits dreams and carries omens, might be one of them, a messenger between the realms of sleeping and waking. Prismo, the wishmaster, could be another, an embodiment of the universe's will to create, to give shape to desire. Even the Enchiridion, that mysterious book of heroes, might be touched by such a spark, its pages alive with the memory of 1,000 forgotten worlds. And then there's life herself, a being who seems to exist both within and beyond the world. When she moves, stars bloom in her wake. When she speaks, reality shifts to listen. Some see her as the closest thing Ooh has to a goddess, though she carries none of the arrogance or cruelty of typical divine figures. She doesn't demand worship, she simply exists, nurturing existence itself. If the Ooze was the cradle, then life is the breath that fills it. Together they form the perfect balance, the still memory below and the living spark above. It's comforting to think that maybe, just maybe, every living thing in Ooh carries a fragment of that divine spark. That within the smallest leaf or the quietest heartbeat lies a trace of the same energy that once shaped galaxies. Princess Bubblegum's scientific mind might call it bioenergy. Peppermint Butler might call it soul essence. And Marceline, ever caught between worlds, might simply call it the song. Each one feels it differently, but they all know it's there, that pulse beneath all life, the rhythm that never stops playing. And perhaps that's what keeps Ooh alive through all its chaos. Not just the laws of magic or evolution, but the persistence of spirit, the divine spark that refuses to fade, even when the world itself falls asleep. In the oldest temples, now buried under candy soil and moss, murals still whisper the story of those first divine lights. They depict not battles or commandments, but gentle gestures, hands of starlight touching rivers, soft glows hovering over the forms of sleeping creatures, sparks sinking into the ground to awaken seeds that had waited eons to grow. These were not gods of power or conquest. They were caretakers, teaching the world to breathe. According to one fragment of text, from the Age of Whispers, there was a moment when these spirits nearly vanished. Or as the elementals grew in strength, their forces began to shape reality in louder ways. Fire burned higher, ice stretched deeper, and candy spread its sticky joy across vast plains. The world was becoming tangible, structured, and busy. The quiet, divine sparks, the ones that had once whispered to the oceans and soothed the sleeping earth, found themselves fading into the background. But the universe has a way of preserving what is sacred. When the noise of creation grows too loud, silence finds a way to return. And so the sparks retreated, not in defeat, but into the unseen spaces, into dreams, memories, and the delicate space between one breath and the next. That's why, even now, mortals can sometimes feel them without realizing it. When Finn stands on a cliff and feels that inexplicable warmth in his chest, when Jake gazes at the stars and suddenly feels smaller yet content, those are the traces of the divine touch. Not commands from a god, but simple reminders that life is connected. The Flame Kingdom, for all its destruction and intensity, carries one of the clearest examples of this divine inheritance. Its fire doesn't only burn, it sings. The crackle of its flames carries notes that resonate with ancient harmony, a pattern older than language itself. The Flame Princess, without ever knowing it, dances to that rhythm. Her temper, her love, her endless yearning, they're all echoes of that primal spirit that once set the world in motion. Similarly, in the quiet of the Ice Kingdom, the air itself hums with a low, crystalline tone. Beneath layers of frost and loneliness, the ice elemental's energy remains pure and reflective, guarding the world's deepest memories. There are moments when even the ice seems to shimmer with emotion, as though it still remembers the divine light that once brushed across its surface before freezing time in place. And somewhere in between, the Candy Kingdom pulses with a joy that feels almost supernatural. On the surface, it may look like the product of science and alchemy, of molecules rearranged into sweetness. But beneath that, something sacred hums. Each candy bean glows faintly with warmth, not from sugar, but from life essence. The divine spark hums quietly in their laughter, in the way they rebuild after every disaster with unwavering optimism. When viewed together, these examples reveal something profound. The divine touch isn't about hierarchy or worship. It's about continuity. Every flame, every snowflake, every heartbeat in Ooh carries a piece of the same eternal rhythm. It connects the living and the dead, the magical and the mundane. Even the Lich, a being of death and decay, was once touched by that spark. His corruption doesn't erase it. It only warps the light, twisting it through despair. But even there, deep within him, a small fragment of that divine song still flickers, buried under layers of darkness. There's a quiet beauty in that idea, that even the most lost souls, the most forgotten corners of Ooh, still carry a trace of the divine. It means that life in Ooh was not an accident, nor was it merely the result of magic gone awry. It was a deliberate act of connection, repeated endlessly through time. The spirits didn't just give shape to existence, they made it aware. They breathed empathy into the soil and curiosity into the stars. And when those sparks retreated from the surface, they didn't abandon their creation. They simply changed form like everything else in this world does. Some became dreams, some became memories. Others took the shape of light itself, flickering softly in the night skies as constellations. When the cosmic owl glides between those stars, perhaps he isn't just a messenger. Perhaps he's the memory of the first divine light, keeping watch over the dream of the universe, ensuring it never fades completely into darkness. Because the divine in Ooh doesn't sit on a throne or dwell in temples. It drifts quietly through every shadow and every sunrise, whispering, "Continue, keep dreaming, keep becoming." When you begin to notice the divine touch in Ooh, it starts appearing everywhere, quietly, subtly, as if it has always been watching from the edges of your dreams. It's in the way a raindrop clings to a leaf before falling. It's in the sudden laughter that breaks the silence after sorrow. It's in how light finds its way through even the thickest clouds. These are small miracles, but they are the truest signs of the spirits that once walked freely through the world. Somewhere in the hidden corners of Ooze collective memory, there are stories that speak of a bridge, a luminous path that once connected the world of form with the realm of pure essence. They called it the lattice of breath. It was not made of stone or light, but of intention. Every time a living being took a breath, a strand of that bridge was woven. Through it, the divine sparks could move freely, guiding dreams, shaping destinies, and whispering ideas into the hearts of mortals. It's said that this lattice still exists, invisible but present, vibrating with every heartbeat in the world. Wizards who meditate in stillness, or spirits that dwell between lives, sometimes glimpse it in the quiet between waking and sleep, a web of light threading through all things. But even the divine must evolve. Over time, as the physical world grew more intricate and magical systems took hold, those pure sparks began to scatter, hiding themselves within living beings. The line between mortal and divine blurred. The heroes and villains of Ooo, each of them carried a faint shimmer of that ancient essence. Finn's courage, for instance, has always been something more than mortal bravery. It's not just about fighting monsters or saving kingdoms. His heart burns with a deeper purpose, a reflection of that first fire that long ago kindled motion in the void. Jake, too, with his stretchy form and unshakable calm, embodies a divine quality. His flexibility isn't merely physical, it's spiritual. He flows through life the way the spirits once flowed through creation, accepting, adapting, always at peace with change. It's as if he remembers, in some quiet part of himself, the rhythm of the world before form took hold. Even BMO carries a spark of that forgotten divinity. Though built of circuits and code, their soul feels alive with innocence, a reminder that consciousness can arise anywhere the divine breath lingers. BMO dreams, feels, and plays with a purity that cannot be explained by science alone. In their childlike wonder, they hold a piece of the spark that first taught the stars how to sing. There's a certain poetry in this. The way the divine chose not to rule, but to live within its own creations. The spirits didn't demand devotion. They became devotion. Every act of kindness, every shared laugh, every tear shed in understanding, became a continuation of that first sacred gesture. And perhaps that's why Ooo, for all its chaos and absurdity, never fully falls into despair. The spark is always rekindling itself through love, through curiosity, through the endless courage of small hearts facing an infinite world. Some ancient philosophers of Ooo believed that each era of the world is guided by a different expression of that divine energy. In the time before the Mushroom War, it expressed itself as knowledge, a hunger for understanding the structure of reality. After the war, when the world was broken and uncertain, it became resilience, the will to rebuild and forgive. And in the current age, perhaps it expresses itself as connection, the quiet awareness that all things, no matter how strange, are part of the same dream. Even Marceline, the vampire queen, carries a reflection of this truth. Her songs, though born of sorrow, often soothe rather than wound. She turns pain into beauty, memory into melody. That act, transforming darkness into light, is itself divine. It's what the original spirits did when they shaped form from chaos. It's what the world continues to do each time it turns decay into growth. So when people in Ooo pray or meditate or simply sit quietly beneath the stars. Perhaps they are not calling to distant gods, but listening for that hum within themselves, the same hum that moves the tides and glows faintly in the hearts of fireflies. The divine touch isn't something that descends from the heavens anymore. It's already here, pulsing in every breath, waiting for those still enough to feel it. In the stillness of night, if you stand on the plains of Ooo and let the wind brush your skin, you might sense it. The warmth behind the air, the faint shimmer beneath the dark. That is the same energy that once birthed the elementals, guided the Ooze, and shaped the destiny of heroes. It is the thread that ties all of Ooo together, unseen yet unbreakable. It is not a god to worship, but a song to remember, echoing quietly through time. And maybe that's the deepest truth of all. The divine never truly left Ooo. It only learned to sleep within things. It hums beneath the roots of trees, drifts through the shimmer of snow, and hides in the rhythm of breathing. Life itself became the temple, and every heart became its altar. If one looks closely at Oo's oldest myths, there's a recurring pattern. The divine spark rarely intervenes through miracles. Instead, it nudges. It whispers at the edges of choice, never commanding, but gently suggesting. When Simon Petrikov put on the crown and began his long, tragic transformation, something small and merciful lingered beneath the madness, a spark that refused to die even when his mind froze. That spark carried the faint light of compassion that Ice King would later show in fleeting moments, proving that the divine touch does not abandon even those who lose themselves. And when Marceline found Simon again, long after the world had changed, the divine thread between them hummed to life. Their reunion wasn't just a story of memory. It was a reawakening of that same grace that has always flowed through Oo's history. It reminded the world that love, in its purest form, is not bound by time, magic, or even sanity. Love is the divine spark remembering itself. The more you follow its traces, the clearer its pattern becomes. When the rainicorns hum their strange songs, their frequencies align perfectly with the ancient tones said to shape creation itself. When Peppermint Butler channels his mysterious powers, he does so through rituals older than recorded time, echoes of that first conversation between spirit and matter. Even Tree Trunks, in her quiet orchard, lives under the care of that same unseen grace. The apples she grows glisten just a little too brightly, as if kissed by something more than sunlight. The world of Ooo might seem chaotic, playful, even absurd, but beneath the laughter and strangeness, there's always structure. That structure is the divine rhythm, soft and enduring. It allows even destruction to become renewal. The Lich, though terrifying, also plays a role in this endless cycle. His desire for nothingness mirrors creation's need for contrast. Without the shadow, the light would have no reason to glow. Even the divine sparks understand this. They do not fight darkness, they balance it. In the farthest reaches of space, beyond Oo's skies, some say there are still remnants of those first spirits, shimmering motes of light that drift between stars. Perhaps they are watching, ensuring that the experiment of life continues. Or perhaps they are asleep, dreaming the next version of reality into being. The beings like Prismo and the cosmic owl might simply be the dreamer's emissaries, crossing the veil between imagination and form. Their presence in the story of Ooo suggests that creation is ongoing, that the divine spark never stopped shaping, only slowed, to let its children build worlds of their own. There's something beautifully humble about that idea. The divine didn't demand worship or perfection. It simply gifted the world with the ability to feel, to create, and to remember. It trusted its creations to make their own meanings, and in doing so, it became something eternal. not a ruler, but a rhythm, not a god, but a melody that keeps playing even after the instruments fall silent. Sometimes in quiet moments, when Finn and Jake rest beneath the night sky, the stars above seem to flicker in response to their dreams. It's as though the universe itself listens. Their laughter becomes prayer. Their adventures become verses in an unending hymn that celebrates existence. The divine spark watches not from above, but from within, smiling softly at the wonder it set in motion. So perhaps that is what divine truly means in Ooh, not something unreachable, but something intimate. It's the quiet will that reminds the ocean to rise, the heart to beat, the soul to seek. It's the unseen comfort that wraps around the lost and the lonely. It's the promise that even after endings, something beautiful always stirs again. And if you close your eyes right now, you might feel it too. The same soft energy that brushed across the first dawn, that whispered to the ooze that set fire and ice into motion. It hums quietly through every living thing, patient and eternal, asking only to be noticed. Because in the end, the divine doesn't dwell in heaven or in power. It dwells in the simple act of being alive. In every heartbeat, every flame, every fleeting dream, it continues. The spark that began the world still glows within it, gentle and endless, waiting to be felt by anyone who remembers to listen. There's a strange kind of quiet that comes after creation. Not the silence of nothingness, but a silence full of waiting. After the divine sparks had danced across Ooh, and the elemental seeds had rooted themselves deep within the planet's heart, the world was alive, but not yet aware. The oceans moved, the winds howled, the volcanoes sang, but none of it knew that it existed. Life at that stage was instinct, beautiful, chaotic, automatic. But something was shifting in the deep places. The Ooze, the same forgotten matter that once carried memories of an older world, began to shimmer again. It wasn't just mutating this time. It was remembering. Traces of what came before, the laughter, the sorrow, the choices of those long vanished, swirled inside it like ghostly echoes. Each molecule seemed to be reaching for something higher, something beyond mere survival. And from that longing, the first awareness began to bloom. It started small. In the depths of the ocean, a single cell hesitated before dividing. Not because it couldn't, but because for the first time, it wondered if it should. That hesitation, barely a flicker in time, was the first spark of thought in Ooze history. The first moment when matter turned inward and asked itself, "Who am I?" That single question, whispered through the waves, was enough to change everything. It spread like light through dark water, reaching other beings, other forms. Soon, creatures began to respond to the world, not just through reflex, but through choice. The tiny glowing fish that once fled from shadow began to linger and gaze upward, fascinated by the shapes above. Plants started to twist, not just toward sunlight, but toward sound, the hum of other life nearby. The world was starting to think. And in this grand awakening, something extraordinary happened: emotion. When awareness first bloomed, it came hand in hand with feeling. The Ooze remembered pain and joy, loss and love, all buried deep within its strange ancestral memory. That inheritance seeped into the creatures it touched, shaping their instincts into something richer. Fear was no longer just a reaction. It became a teacher. Curiosity became a compass. Sorrow became a bridge to empathy. And love, soft and ancient, became the most powerful force of all, binding everything that had once been separate. From these first feelings, the soul began to take shape. Not a soul in the religious sense, but something more subtle. A consciousness that carried within it both the memory of chaos and the yearning for meaning. It was the quiet song of the universe realizing it could sing about itself. The elementals, fire, ice, candy, and slime, noticed the change. They were no longer just forces of nature. They were witnesses. Fire saw this new awareness and called it passion. Ice felt it and called it memory. Candy absorbed it and called it sweetness. Slime embraced it and called it flow. Each elemental force gave part of itself to this rising tide of consciousness, and through their gifts, early sentience began to flourish across Ooo. But consciousness is never a simple gift. With awareness came the first taste of loneliness. Once a creature could recognize itself, it could also recognize its own isolation. The sea no longer felt endless. It became a home that could be lost. The night was no longer just darkness. It became mystery, fear, and wonder. The first dreams were born in this tension between knowing and not knowing. Those early dreams were strange, flickering things. They mixed the raw power of creation with the delicate touch of imagination. Some beings dreamed themselves into new forms, spirits that drifted between realities, or creatures that could change shape with thought alone. The dream world became a reflection of Ooze's growing mind, a soft mirror where the universe could practice becoming itself. And from these dreams came the earliest versions of what we might one day call souls. Not perfect or eternal, but luminous, tiny fragments of memory that carried emotion like seeds. When one being perished, a whisper of it lingered in the air, drifting into another form. Rebirth wasn't yet a rule, but an accident of grace. The same spark that had lived in one creature could flicker again elsewhere, reshaped but familiar, carrying faint traces of its past. In that way, consciousness began not as a grand creation, but as a slow remembering. The world wasn't learning something new. It was recalling something it had always known deep within the Ooze. Every thought, every dream, every act of kindness was a ripple spreading outward, awakening more of the sleeping world. And as the ripples grew stronger, Ooo began to glow, not with light, but with awareness. The forests hummed with thought. The mountains dreamed. Even the rivers seemed to whisper secrets to those who would listen. The planet itself was beginning to wake up. It's said that when the world first began to dream of itself, it did so through the simplest of beings. Tiny, half-formed creatures, barely aware of their shapes, started to follow patterns that were not purely instinct. Some began to mimic the movements of light across water, creating strange dances that served no purpose but to exist. Others sang without knowing why, their voices blending with the sigh of the wind and the low rumble of the earth. These were the first expressions of beauty, the earliest hints that consciousness could create not just to survive, but to feel. The ooze that once birthed all life now pulsed with rhythm. In every drop of it, memory and possibility intertwined like threads of light and shadow. Perhaps this was the moment when the very essence of Ooo began to resemble its later inhabitants, a world that thought in metaphors, dreamed in colors, and breathed through stories. There are whispers in old magical texts that claim the first souls were not contained within bodies at all. They were vast, drifting presences, wisps of luminous thought moving through the air, the water, even through the molten veins of the earth. They didn't speak, but when they brushed against each other, the world itself seemed to shimmer, as if the ground could feel the beginnings of emotion passing through it. Over time, these wandering sparks began to anchor themselves. Some settled into creatures of flesh and bone, others into the roots of trees or the quiet shimmer of crystals deep underground. Every form they touched became just a little more aware, carrying a faint trace of wonder inside. The first forest became conscious in this way, knowing the warmth of the sun, Sensing the rhythm of rain, mountains began to hum softly in their sleep, aware of their own weight and patience. The air itself learned to remember, holding whispers longer than it should have. But not every awakening was peaceful. Awareness brought with it confusion. Some forms resisted the strange spark within them, twisting and reshaping in ways that broke their original design. Creatures became both predator and poet, capable of nurturing and destroying, often in the same heartbeat. The ooze that once only dreamed of life now carried within it both the potential for creation and corruption. And in this strange tension, consciousness deepened. To know joy, one must also know sorrow. To dream of connection, one must first feel separation. The early beings of Ooo learned these truths in the language of instinct and pain, their stories etched into the very soil. The echo of those first emotional awakenings still lingers in the land, in the ruins and rivers that seem to remember even now. Some scholars of magic believe that this stage, when awareness first turned inward, is when the concept of soul resonance began. It is the idea that every living thing hums with a frequency unique to its experiences and emotions. When two beings share a bond, be it love, grief, or fear, their frequencies align, creating harmony or dissonance that ripples through the fabric of existence. This theory suggests that the earliest connections between creatures were not physical but vibrational. They didn't need words, their souls simply recognized each other. Imagine, then, a world where even the stones could feel when you walked upon them, when rivers could sense the sorrow of travelers passing through. This wasn't fantasy, it was Ooze's first symphony of awareness, each note a thought, each vibration a memory. It was messy, raw, and yet impossibly beautiful. And somewhere within that living song, a new kind of spark began to glow, the spark of individuality. Until then, the Ooze and the creatures born from it had been parts of one shared consciousness, bound by the memory of the old world. But now fragments were breaking off, developing their own sense of self. A fish that once swam as part of the collective began to see itself as I. A flower blooming under starlight began to feel pride in its color. The great web of awareness was unraveling into billions of tiny, shining threads, each one its own mind, its own soul. This moment, the birth of I, was both a blessing and a fracture. For the first time, beings felt truly alive, but they also felt truly alone. The unity of the old world faded, replaced by the yearning for connection. From that yearning came the roots of companionship, empathy, and eventually, love. And so, even as the whole of creation fractured into countless pieces, something deeper began to weave it back together, a quiet understanding that no soul, no matter how separate, was ever truly apart from the rest. In the heart of Ooo, the ooze pulsed with pride, as if it too understood what had just been born. From its depths, life had not only grown, it had begun to dream itself awake. As the first waves of individuality rippled through Ooo, the balance between connection and separation began to define everything that followed. The land itself seemed to respond to this new consciousness. Forests deepened in color, winds grew gentler, and rivers carved new paths as if guided by unseen thought. The planet was no longer just a stage for life. It had become a companion to it, learning and changing alongside its creations. Somewhere in those early ages, a quiet miracle began to unfold. A creature, a small, translucent being born from the ooze, stood still one day and simply watched the sunrise. It didn't eat, it didn't flee, it just gazed at the light and felt something stir inside. That stirring wasn't hunger or fear, it was awe, the realization that the world was beautiful. That moment, simple and wordless, might have been the true birth of the soul as we know it. the capacity to find meaning in something that does not serve survival, to feel gratitude for existence itself. From then on, consciousness became richer, more layered. Beings began to perceive not just the world, but their place within it. The oceans grew curious about the stars reflected on their surface. The mountains began to dream of flight. Even the trees, still and ancient, longed to whisper to the wind. The spark of awareness had become a flame, and Ooh was glowing with it. It was during this time that ancient elemental energies began to shape the evolution of minds. Fire introduced the impulse of passion, the will to create and destroy, the drive to move forward. Ice brought reflection, the power to remember, to mourn, and to plan. Candy gifted sweetness, the capacity for joy, comfort, and love. And slime granted adaptability, teaching all things to bend rather than break, to flow through change with grace. Together, these forces didn't just shape biology, they sculpted emotion itself. It's said that the first sentient beings of Ooh could feel these forces within them, like seasons shifting through their hearts. When a creature burned with curiosity, fire whispered through its thoughts. When sorrow made it still and silent, ice sang softly in its veins. When it reached for another in kindness, candy bloomed in its chest. And when it faced change without fear, slime flowed in its spirit. The soul was not a single spark, but a symphony of these four voices, harmonizing within the body of every living thing. And so consciousness evolved, not just through survival, but through emotion and meaning. The early beings of Ooh didn't invent language the way we imagine. They spoke through resonance, patterns of light, sound, and movement that carried feeling more than logic. A ripple in the air might mean sorrow, a pulse of warmth might mean joy. These were not mere communications, they were exchanges of being, moments where two souls briefly became one. In the distant silence of the cosmos, perhaps other worlds were born of reason or logic. But Oo's consciousness was born of feeling. It wasn't about knowing, but about feeling itself into knowing. Every emotion, every flicker of thought, was a step toward understanding existence. The world learned itself through the heart. But even this delicate awakening carried its own shadows. With awareness came questions that echoed through every living thing. Why am I here? What happens when I end? Is there something beyond this? The same ooze that had given birth to thought began to tremble with uncertainty. For every spark of joy, there was a spark of doubt, and doubt, as it often does, became the soil where deeper wisdom would one day grow. The first death that was truly felt marked another turning point. When one of the early creatures faded, its companions didn't just move on, they lingered. They searched for what was missing. They grieved. That grief was the universe realizing it could lose something it loved. It was the first heartbreak, and in it, the first trace of immortality was born. The idea that maybe, just maybe, what had been lost still existed somewhere, unseen but felt. From that moment, consciousness no longer belonged only to the living. The memories of those who faded began to echo through the elements. Fire carried their will, ice their memories, candy their love, and slime their resilience. The souls of the departed became part of the rhythm of nature itself, whispering through the wind and shimmering through light. Death was no longer an ending. It became a transformation, a return to the great dreaming ooze that had started it all. And so, Oo's early consciousness learned its most profound truth, that every ending was only another beginning in disguise. Life flowed into death, death into memory, memory into feeling, and feeling back into life. The cycle of awareness was complete. The soul, in its purest sense, was not something separate or divine. It was the world recognizing itself through infinite forms. Every creature that lived, loved, and faded away added its verse to the great, ongoing lullaby of existence. And even now, if you listen closely, to the whispering grass, to the crackling of fire, to the quiet hum of the night, you can almost hear it. The song of the first souls, softly reminding Ooh that it was never truly alone. Some say the first echoes of that song still linger beneath Oo's surface, carried in the slow pulse of the earth and the sigh of the tides. It hums in forgotten caverns, in the faint shimmer of crystal pools that glow with their own inner light. To those who are quiet enough, who listen without trying to hear, it sounds like the heartbeat of the world itself, a steady rhythm that connects every living thing to the same ancient beginning. As eons pass, that rhythm deepened into something wondrous. The creatures who had once only dreamed began to shape their thoughts into purpose. From the mud and moss rose beings who could wonder, build, remember. The line between instinct and intention blurred until life itself became an act of imagination. Consciousness had ripened into creativity. The same awareness that had once watched the sunrise now painted meaning onto the fabric of reality. It's believed that around this time, the first magic emerged, not as a separate force, but as an extension of the soul. Magic was the echo of consciousness made visible, the way emotion could ripple outward and change the world. A joyful heart might coax a flower to bloom. A sorrowful one might summon rain. The early beings didn't command magic, they sang it. Each spell was more like a lullaby to the universe, a request whispered to the old Ooze beneath everything. In this era of awakening, Ooh became a place of wonder beyond measure. Mountains grew faces, rivers whispered stories, and the sky itself shimmered with memory. The boundary between life and the land dissolved until the two were one and the same. The planet had achieved what few worlds ever could. It had become self-aware through its creations. Every living being was both a thought and a thinker, both the dreamer and the dream. But awareness is a fragile flame, easily shaken by the winds of time. As forms grew more complex, so too did their desires. Where once there had been harmony, now there was yearning, each consciousness reaching for more individuality, more control, more permanence. The gift of the soul was also the seed of struggle. Out of this yearning arose the first ambitions, the first rivalries, the first mistakes. Yet even in conflict, the great song continued, richer for its dissonance. Some of the early conscious beings began to wonder if they could preserve their awareness beyond death, not through the natural cycle of memory and rebirth, but by bending magic to their will. These were the first mages, experimenting with the substance of existence itself. They pulled at the threads of life and found that the ooze still answered, though its voice had grown quieter, more cautious. It seemed to understand that awareness, once divided too far, could devour itself. And so, for every being that sought eternity, another returned willingly to the flow, giving its essence back to the soil and stars. Balance was maintained not through rules, but through instinct, a quiet knowing that all souls, no matter how far they wandered, belonged to the same beginning. Even the most ambitious sorcerers felt it, that gentle tug beneath their power, reminding them that magic and mortality were born of the same breath. It was during this age that the soul of Ooh began to split into distinct realms of experience: mind, body, and spirit. The body became the vessel, shaped by the elements and bound by time. The mind became the bridge, the place where thoughts and dreams wove together. And the spirit, the purest echo of the ooze, remained timeless, drifting through all things like starlight through water. Together, they formed the triad of consciousness that every being in Ooh would inherit. When night fell across those early lands and the winds carried songs of old creation, the creatures of Ooh would rest and dream. And in their dreams they found each other again, the old unity, the shared ocean of awareness that had never truly gone. In those moments of dreaming, the separation between souls dissolved. Fire dreamt of ice, ice of slime, candy of flame. All remembered that they were parts of the same eternal thought, flickering together in the quiet of existence. The birth of consciousness was never a single moment, but a slow blooming, a flower that still opens, petal by petal, with every heartbeat of the world. Every dream you've ever had, every feeling that moves you, for no reason at all, is part of that same unfolding. When a child of Ooh looks at the stars and wonders what they are, the universe smiles through them, remembering itself once more. And maybe that's the secret of the soul, that it's not something hidden inside us, but something we are all inside of. A great, gentle awareness that once rose from the ooze, found shape in life, and learned to call itself by 1,000 names. Every whisper of wind, every spark of laughter, every tear that falls is another note in its endless lullaby. In the stillness of night, Ooh continues to hum softly to itself, half asleep, half awake, dreaming of all that it has been and all that it will still become. The ooze has long since cooled, but its memory remains, living quietly within every soul that walks the land. The first light of awareness still glows, patient and kind, reminding us that consciousness was never an invention. It was a remembering, a slow return to the truth that everything that has ever lived, loved, or dreamed has always been one. There's something beautiful about the way life never truly stops. Even in silence, even in stillness, something inside the world keeps breathing. The soil, the air, the stars, they are all alive in their own patient way. Ooh, ever shifting and full of echoes, has never really slept since that first spark of awareness was born. It only dreams deeper and deeper, turning those dreams into the shape of reality. The wise wizards and philosophers of old used to whisper that the world itself was dreaming us all, that every river, every flame, every thought was part of one long, slow dream stretching back to the very first heartbeat of creation. And if you listen closely enough, they said, you might hear the rhythm of that dream in your own chest, the gentle rise and fall, like waves against the shore, reminding you that you too are part of that eternal blooming. Life in this way was never meant to be linear. It doesn't move from beginning to end. It folds, curls, and opens like a flower in constant motion. One petal fades, another unfolds. Every story, every soul, every moment of joy or sorrow becomes another layer in the great bloom of Ooh. The universe breathes in birth and exhales in transformation. And somewhere between those breaths, existence renews itself endlessly. The people of Ooh across all eras, humans, elemental spirits, and creatures of strange origins, seem to share an unspoken understanding of this. They live their lives knowing that nothing ever truly ends. When the candy kingdom melts, it returns to sugar and soil, and from that sweetness, something else grows. When the ice melts into water, it joins the flow of rivers, whispering cold memories into warm currents. Even destruction carries a kind of tenderness here, a promise that everything broken will one day return as something new. To live in Ooh is to live in the middle of a dream that remembers itself. Every hill was once a flame, every ocean a whisper, every star, perhaps, the echo of an ancient soul. The bloom never ceases, it only changes its color. And in those changes, life finds meaning. The heroes of Ooh, Finn, Jake, Marceline, Simon, and all the others, are simply the dream made conscious. They are the fragments of Oo's great mind walking its own landscape, rediscovering what it already knows, that love, loss, courage, and forgiveness are all parts of the same cycle. Finn's endless curiosity mirrors the Ooze's first flicker of awareness. Jake's warmth echoes the world's memory of unity. Marceline's grief is the song of ice learning to love again. Even Simon's sorrow carries the wisdom of the first awakening, how consciousness once born cannot help but feel. Perhaps that's why no story in Ooh ever truly ends. Every tale folds back into another. Every life finds its way into new forms. The Land of Ooo isn't a place where history is buried. It's a place where history is reborn over and over in laughter, in song, in the quiet wind that carries an old melody across the grasslands. The ancients once told a story about the bloom eternal, a mythical tree said to grow at the heart of Ooo. They claimed its roots reached into every realm, past, present, and beyond. Its petals shimmered with the colors of every soul that had ever lived, opening and closing with the rhythm of creation itself. To look upon it, they said, was to see all of existence breathing. The tree wasn't made of wood or leaves, but of memory, emotion, and thought, woven together like light through mist. In some distant sense, perhaps that tree isn't just a myth. Perhaps it is a truth that lives in everything that exists. Every act of kindness, every choice to heal rather than harm, every dream shared between friends, these are petals of the endless bloom, opening softly across time. The magic of Ooh, the consciousness of its people, even the sorrow of its broken moments, all feed into that same infinite flowering. And maybe, when the world sleeps, when the skies dim and even the fires rest, Ooh dreams of that tree, of its own blooming, its own renewal. The dream is gentle, slow, full of the heartbeat of everything that ever was and everything still to come. In that sleep, the world remembers what it has always known, that life isn't something that begins or ends. It simply continues, endlessly unfolding like a song without a final note. If you've ever walked through the quiet meadows of Ooh at twilight, you might have felt it, the hush that falls over everything just before the stars appear. It's not emptiness. It's the world taking a soft breath. The grass bends slightly. The air hums with a sound that isn't quite wind, and even the smallest creatures seem to pause as though listening for something ancient and familiar. That moment, that stillness, is the endless bloom breathing in. For every star that flickers in Oo's sky, there's a story unfolding below it. A sprout pushing through the soil, an idea blooming in a wizard's heart, a memory returning to someone long after they thought they'd forgotten it. Each of these moments is a petal, part of a bloom so vast that no one being could ever see it whole. But the feeling of it, the sense that life is gently, endlessly unfolding, is always there, like a soft hum beneath reality. Ooze's magic, too, seems to follow this rhythm. It doesn't vanish when forgotten. It merely changes form. A potion, brewed in the age of wizards, might evaporate into the clouds, return as rain, and one day be absorbed by a flower that grows in the Candy Kingdom. The flower, without knowing why, glows faintly blue at night, echoing the spell it carries within its veins. In that way, every act of magic becomes part of the world's slow, eternal recycling of wonder. Nothing is lost, only transformed. Even the great cataclysms, those world-shifting events that once remade Ooh again and again, follow the same quiet rhythm. The Mushroom War, the elemental shifts, the fall and rise of kingdoms. They were not endings, but deep breaths in the life of the world. Destruction has never been final here. It's a turning of the soil, the making of space for something new to grow. Perhaps that's why, even after centuries of chaos, Ooh never truly lost its innocence. Its people still laugh, still dream, still find beauty in the smallest of things. The land itself seems to forgive endlessly. Even ruins become gardens, and even shadows cradle new life. That is the way of the endless bloom. Every fall is a preparation for rising. In the far reaches of Ooze's ancient past, some say the first sentient beings understood this truth more deeply than any who came after. They would meditate for centuries, letting their forms dissolve into wind and water, trusting that their essence would someday return in new forms. To them, death was a kind of migration, a gentle slipping between petals of the same eternal flower. Some even claimed to see the bloom in their final moments, an endless spiral of light and color opening around them, beckoning them home. It's comforting, isn't it? To imagine that when something ends, it doesn't fall into darkness, but into the next layer of the bloom. Maybe that's what we feel when we miss someone, or remember a dream so vividly it hurts. We're brushing against another petal of the same great flower, one that our hearts remember even when our minds do not. The wizards of old called this phenomenon soul continuity. They believed that consciousness was like pollen, drifting from one bloom to the next, never destroyed, only carried onward. Every act of kindness sent that pollen further, helping new life take root. Every expression of love was a ripple in the soil that nourished unseen growth. They said that to live kindly was to help the bloom expand, to help existence itself remember how to dream more beautifully. And maybe that's what the Land of Ooo has always been, a world teaching itself how to dream kindly. The more its people laugh, forgive, and create, the more vibrant the bloom becomes. Every time Finn chooses mercy over vengeance, every time Princess Bubblegum learns to trust again, every time Marceline sings to the stars, they're all feeding the same quiet miracle. They're helping the dream of life keep blooming. Even time itself seems to flow differently in this rhythm. In Ooo, moments don't fade. They fold into one another. Memories from thousands of years ago can resurface in new hearts. A melody hummed by a long-forgotten hero might one day emerge in the song of a creature that's never heard of them. The bloom carries every note forward, weaving the past and present into the same soft pattern of rebirth. When you think about it that way, maybe we're all part of the same dream, one that began long before us and will continue long after. The endless bloom isn't just the story of Ooo. It's the story of everything that has ever dared to exist, to feel, to love. And maybe that's why Ooo feels so alive, even in silence. The trees seem to whisper secrets not because they have mouths, but because life itself is trying to tell its story through them. The rivers murmur because they remember, each ripple a syllable in the world's long-flowing sentence. Even the mountains hum faintly at night, resonating with the quiet rhythm of creation still unfolding. There's an old tale told by forest spirits that when the first drop of rain fell on Ooo after the Mushroom War, it carried within it the memory of everything that had been lost. The laughter of ancient kings, the warmth of vanished suns, the heartbeat of every creature that once walked the soil. When that drop struck the ground, it split into countless tiny seeds, invisible to mortal eyes. Those seeds didn't grow into trees or flowers, but into possibilities. They became the unseen dreams that drift through the air, waiting to land in the heart of anyone open enough to feel them. That's the hidden nature of the endless bloom. It doesn't always grow where we expect it to. Sometimes it sprouts in the mind of a lonely scientist who builds a candy kingdom out of grief. Sometimes it takes root in the heart of a vampire queen who once thought love was a wound. And sometimes it simply opens in the smile of a boy who believes that even in the strangest world imaginable, being kind still matters. Each of them, knowingly or not, is part of the same vast, dreaming organism that Ooze calls life. The ancients often described the bloom not as a single flower, but as a living network, each thought, feeling, and heartbeat connected by glowing threads of unseen magic. The world wasn't made of separate parts, they said, but of echoes, vibrations of the same eternal note. Every being in Ooze, from the smallest snail to the mightiest elemental, hums with that shared resonance. It's what lets a tear of sadness fall in one corner of the world and inspire a song of comfort in another. In this view, even conflict has purpose. Chaos isn't a flaw in the system. It's a turning of the soil, the way the bloom breathes and evolves. Without darkness, there could be no contrast to the light that defines life. Without GOLB, there could be no reflection of what existence means. The bloom doesn't reject destruction. It transforms it, weaving even pain into its design. The scars of the world become its roots, holding the petals together when the winds of time blow hard. Sometimes, late at night, when the stars are unusually bright, you can almost sense that pulse of unity. The constellations seem to sway like the petals of some cosmic flower, the moon its center and Ooze its reflection. The lights flicker softly as though responding to an invisible rhythm, a lullaby older than any language. Maybe it's the bloom singing to itself, reminding every soul beneath the sky that they are not alone, that their light still matters, however small it feels. In a few rare legends, heroes claim to have glimpsed the heart of the bloom itself. Not a place, not a thing, but a feeling, an overwhelming harmony where every sound, color, and memory merged into one. They said it was like hearing every story at once, yet understanding all of them perfectly. In that moment, they realized that there was never any true separation between life, magic, and spirit. The Ooze, the elements, the divine sparks, they weren't competing forces, but different languages describing the same truth. The world is dreaming itself alive over and over again. When those heroes returned, they didn't bring back riches or wisdom written in stone. Instead, they came back quieter, gentler. They spoke less, listened more. They began planting gardens where ruins once stood. They sang to sleeping creatures and painted doors on broken walls. Because once you understand the bloom, you see that everything deserves a chance to grow again. That's what the cycle is teaching. The meaning of existence isn't survival, but continuation. Even the nightosphere, with its endless chaos, plays a part. Some whisper that Hunson Abadir himself unknowingly nourishes the bloom each time he consumes a soul, because nothing truly ends in his realm either. It just changes shape, joins the deeper pattern, perhaps to return one day as light, laughter, or love. The bloom doesn't discriminate. It absorbs every fragment of experience, turning even despair into compost for future joy. And if you listen carefully during those half-asleep moments, when dreams blur into waking, you might catch a glimpse of it too, a pulse that seems to match your own heartbeat, a faint shimmer behind your closed eyes, as though something vast and gentle is blooming somewhere deep within you. That's the heart of Ooze, still dreaming, still creating, still whispering to every soul that drifts through its story. Rest easy. You are part of the bloom. And so Ooze continues to bloom, not as a fixed paradise, but as a living dream forever unfolding. The fields grow wild where kingdoms once stood. The oceans hum with old memories, and the skies shimmer with the faint glow of stories yet to be told. Each sunrise is a quiet act of creation, a soft breath from the world's sleeping heart. Even when the day fades and the shadows stretch long, you can feel it, the gentle pulse of something eternal beneath it all. That's what makes Ooze so hauntingly beautiful. It doesn't hide the ruins or pretend that the past never happened. It carries every scar with grace, as if they are petals themselves, reminders of growth, loss, and rebirth. Every broken sword, every forgotten ruin, every cracked piece of glass is part of the same sacred pattern. The world has learned to dream even through its wounds. Think of the Land of Ooo as a tapestry spun from time itself. Each thread represents a life, a fleeting spark of consciousness, and when one fades, another takes its place. But nothing is ever truly erased. Every thread leaves a trace of its color, and those colors blend, deepening the world's texture. Maybe that's what the ancients meant when they said, life never ends. It just changes hands. Sometimes you can almost feel those invisible threads tugging at you. When a stranger's laughter reminds you of someone you've lost. When a breeze feels familiar, like a voice from long ago. When you stand in silence and your heart seems to echo with something vast and loving. Those are the threads pulling tight, weaving you into the dream again. Even Finn and Jake, whose adventures have stretched across time and dimensions, are part of this endless blooming. They've touched so many lives, changed so many hearts, that their echoes will never truly fade. Every story they left behind continues to ripple outward, inspiring kindness, courage, and curiosity in those who hear it. The bloom carries them too, scattering their essence through Ooh like pollen on the wind. And maybe that's what life was always meant to be, not a quest to reach a perfect ending, but a never-ending act of connection. The universe sings, and every soul adds its own quiet note. Together they form a harmony that transcends endings. The bloom doesn't stop. It just shifts its rhythm, its petals closing and opening again, guided by unseen hands. In this way, the divine, the magical, and the mortal all intertwine. The ooze that first birthed life still moves beneath the ground, warm and humming. The elemental seeds still breathe in the air, their forces dancing through every storm and flicker of flame. The ancient spirits still whisper, guiding those who listen closely. And through it all, the spark of consciousness, the soul of Ooh, keeps expanding, gently dreaming of new ways to exist. Some say the dream of Ooh will never end because it isn't confined to its borders. Every time someone tells its story, its roots stretch a little further, curling into the hearts of those who believe in it. The world doesn't stop at the edge of the screen or the borders of imagination. It grows wherever there's wonder. Maybe, right now, Ooh is blooming in you, in your thoughts, in your memories, in your quiet belief that something strange and beautiful is always waiting just beyond the horizon. And if that's true, then the dream continues every time you close your eyes. The endless bloom opens again in the hush of night, in the rhythm of your breathing, in the stillness between your heartbeats. And maybe that's what the universe has been doing all along, learning to see itself through countless eyes, to feel through countless lives, to love through countless hearts. So tonight, as you drift off, remember this gentle truth: you are part of that dream. Your story, no matter how small it seems, is a petal in the great blooming of existence. The light that flickers behind your eyes, the warmth in your chest, the soft pulse of your breath, all of it belongs to the same creation that brought Ooh to life, the same mystery that turned silence into song. And somewhere, deep within that dream, the Land of Ooo keeps growing, glowing softly beneath its moonlit sky. The candy fields sway. The stars hum. The wind carries lullabies across sleeping valleys. Everything rests, and everything begins again. So close your eyes now. Let the world breathe through you. Let the bloom unfold in your heart. And remember that even in stillness, life is always becoming something new. Good night.